Okay, we are live. Yeah, this is our pre-radio show warm-up, I guess we'd call it. Right? Yeah. Okan, thanks a lot for joining. We plan to have a lot of fun, and what we need from you is, first of all, let's go ahead and check and see if we're truly on LinkedIn. Could you check maybe on your phone? Because yeah, that would be cool. Because we had some problems last time. We went ahead and performed a live stream. This was last Saturday. And lo and behold, it didn't work with LinkedIn. It worked on the other stream. So we have learned from the situation. And so might be a little bit of a delay. What do you see? Let's see. Maybe, just maybe, if any of you are currently on the live stream, can you ping us from LinkedIn to let us know that you could see us? That's another possibility. See? Where would it be? It would probably be a posting that you got. Oh, okay. You didn't see anything? Oh, yes. It works. All right. Nice. Hey, it works. That's great. Okay, folks. Let's give you some information as to what we'll be covering today. So, Okan, what are we going to cover? He's the person I'm interviewing, so he's going to have to tell us what we're covering.
I guess we're going to talk a lot about change. We're going to talk about systems change. We're going to talk about systems thinking a little bit. And yeah, we're just going to talk about change and wherever the conversation goes, whether it's social entrepreneurship or something else. We will cover a lot of ground, I think, today.
Sure, of course. And I think it's very important for all of you that you have an opportunity to influence our conversation, right? And so the objective is to use the chat box. Go ahead and push through your messages in the chat box. And I didn't see, this is the great about this pre-warm-up. I need to make sure I get my glasses. Glasses, where are you? I have my face mask, but I cannot find my glasses. Hold on. And this is typical. It has to be somewhere.
I can also read them from here.
Can you read them? He has good eyesight, much better than mine, that's for sure. This is only proof that we are truly live. What about? You know what I just did? I was over efficient and I put the glasses away and I couldn't find them because I put them away. Does that ring a bell? Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, so we got the glasses on. We can actually go ahead and read what's going on in the chat box. Maybe to get us started, we have another 13 minutes to go before we go live. This is an opportunity for you to talk a little bit about all of these different startups that you're running, because I think it would be quite interesting. I don't think we're going to have much of an opportunity to go into detail for various reasons during the radio show. So let's take advantage, Okan, and you tell us about what you're actually doing. He has a lot of projects.
Okay, so let's start with, I think, the main organization, which is called Prime Movers. So Prime Movers is a social enterprise that offers a leadership program for young people that are passionate about social and environmental change. So we give them a lot of workshops on social entrepreneurship skills, but also systems thinking and some social innovation skills as well. And they apply what they learn in the social startups that we have. So one that we have, I guess it's a bit more relevant to today's topic, is called One Day. It comes from the kind of the motto that one day we will live in a world that we're proud of. And the conversation is around kind of how to get there. So this is built on social innovation, systems thinking, and social entrepreneurship in our case. And the way it works is we interview academics, NGOs, and companies and try to come up with certain problem areas that might be underserved. And we bring these to the conference and come up with ideas on how to solve them in terms of social businesses, online platforms, etc. And then we either implement them or connect these ideas and research with existing social entrepreneurship networks so that they take it on and something happens afterwards. That's half the day. The other half of the day is regular sessions on systems thinking, social innovation, social entrepreneurship, and we focus on waste and food waste, so basically any type of solid waste, gender equality, and responsible digitalization, so things like media literacy, fake news, all this sort of thing. The second one is called Kindby. This is an online platform where you can rent.
That was my phone. 10-minute warning. Just as a curiosity, can you all hear Okan okay?
Yeah, I'm a bit far from the mic. So
yeah, that's why, because I speak loud, and maybe what we might even want to do is try to switch. Why don't we try that? We're going to play musical chairs here, folks. Go ahead. Because in essence, all I have to do is go live, and there isn't going to be much. I bet you all can hear me, and really now, even with the glasses, I cannot read the chat box. So you know what? You're going to no. You answer your own chats. That's what we're going to do.
All right, let's do that.
So you know what, folks? I went ahead and tried to. I found my glasses. Wow! But I don't even need them because I can't even read from this distance. So Okan, I've entrusted you with the responsibility of managing the chat box.
I am honored.
And then the great thing is, we're not performing social distancing. I just realized. You didn't see that, folks. The good thing is you actually know this program, so that really helps me out a lot. So that really helps me out. And in fact, we got some message.
Great. Well, they're saying that it works on LinkedIn, so awesome.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm sorry I'm sorry to break your flow here, and I should probably make sure we're talking about social distancing. Here is your water. Nice. This is my water, and we should not cross paths with our waters.
Right.
So I'm going to do this mic.
So yeah, I was saying the Kindby. This is another social startup that we have. This is an online platform where you can rent sustainable and high quality baby clothing and accessories. This is kind of our approach to ending this fast fashion nonsense. And the third one we have is called Mission Liftoff. And this is an online, that's right. This is an online platform where teachers can download ready-made lesson plans about these issues, about sustainability, gender equality, and responsible digitalization. So they can download a lesson plan so that they can themselves run a workshop in their classes, about these three topics. Mm-hmm. So we do also external workshops ourselves in schools, and we thought, how do we scale the impact of this? Then we kind of just help teachers do the workshops in their classrooms. And that's about it for now.
Yeah, it would be interesting for me, and depending upon how the conversation goes, how do you measure success?
In terms of?
Regardless. I mean, the whole idea, it doesn't matter what we do. If we do something and it brings no value, then you have to raise the question, well, why am I doing it? Mm-hmm. Not to say that what we do is, if we don't receive immediate value, that the whole thing's in vain. But if we cannot measure it, then that's a serious problem. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes and no. So It depends on kind of like what you're measuring exactly. In my opinion, I had this conversation with somebody recently about in social business, you have kind of two things to measure, right? You have the business side of things and you have the social side of things.
Right.
So the business side of things is much easier to measure. That's just regular business stuff. The impact side of things is not as easy to measure. I personally am a bit cynical about impact measurement overall, but also that comes with a disclaimer. I think I need to read way more about it, to be honest, to actually have an opinion on it. Just to me, the reasons as to why we do impact measurement when it takes systems thinking into account, for example, is not really, do I say effective? So this is like, for example, for impact measurement, a common scenario could be something like you have a funder of some sort, whether it's a donor, whether it's a company that is, this could also be the case of a company that creates that or plays a part in creating the problem you're trying to solve. And they have a foundation, the foundation trickles the money to NGOs and whatever else. And then the NGO has to do impact measurement and say, we've done this and this to the funder. And basically the common theme here is you always have to report to people who give you money most of the time. Of course, there's impact measurement that's done in other ways. And this brings in the question of who actually pays for social and environmental value, right? So is this set up the way it's supposed to be, kind of, right? So if you create economic value, people understand that immediately. If you go to a company or even a city, whatever, and say, look, I have a marketing agency and I'm going to help you run this campaign and I can save you 600K, and they're going to say, yeah, that makes sense. I don't know how to do it, so you do it. But if you go and say, look, I'm going to save you this much CO2, and you have city targets or whatever. I mean, the city of Vienna is actually doing great, but you can think of a different example, and they will say, yeah, that's a different conversation. So this is one thing we're gonna have a session on in the conference, actually, is who pays for social innovation, who pays for social and environmental value. And that is the part that makes me a little bit more cynical about impact measurement.
What if we were to do the inverse and we were to go ahead and raise the question, who pays when we don't have it? And that might be an interesting way of approaching it, because the fact is that we're always paying. We might not necessarily be cognizant of what we're paying because it's very obtuse or oblique. That being said, there is always a cost, and I'm looking at it very often from the circular economy perspective. When we're talking about a linear supply chain, and at the end we throw things away. Well, there's a cost tied to going ahead and throwing things away. It's just because we are not directly being asked to go ahead and pay that does not mean that there's no price to it. And I would also go ahead and raise the question, is value always impact? And I think that gets closer to what you're thinking, if I'm not mistaken, because the value could be something that's not necessarily tangible. And I think that, and this is always the struggle, how can we go ahead with those soft things? How do we go ahead and create some sort of indicator so that we can measure, not necessarily even referring to those people who are funding our proposal, but how do we measure that we are on the right track? And I think that's really the key. I see there's something in the chat box. As I mentioned, I cannot read it. And
they just say that it works.
Oh, all right. Okay. Let's give you a status update, folks. It is now 9:57 and 10 seconds, and we go live at 10 o'clock. And so I'm going to totally wing this one, Okan. I'm not going to wear any headset. We just need to make sure that you're close enough to the mic. I need to make sure that I have this one right. I'm going to do mic number 5. So watch this, folks. Another radio show host said, I'm taking the mystery out of producing radio. And I think I'm not professing social distancing again. Apologies for that. I'm a proponent of egalitarianism, and I think that everybody should be able to do this, and that is really the spirit of the station. So, and you know that you are at Radio Orange, 94.0 Vienna. So you are on microphone number 6. I'm going to be on microphone number 5, and then I'll go ahead and you can see the VU meter.
Right.
And so, should we go ahead and we're talking about egalitarianism. This is the mixing board, and can I see? Yes, you can see it. You hear my voice, and you can see how it actually goes ahead and gets measured. So we're totally winging this. I go ahead and put this back. Make sure I don't lose you here. If I ever cut you off, just go ahead and feel empowered to go ahead and move that thing any way you like. We can see here how we're doing. And we have a countdown. 58:45.
15 seconds.
I tend to think that this is probably okay because once we get to the microphone, it's going to be wow. You see the red?
Right.
Yeah. So I probably turned mine down because I have a loud voice. But most of you who know me already know that one already. So let me turn this down. You have less of a loud voice. Maybe try to say.
I can be louder.
Can you? But you're not coming through very strong. So either move closer to the mic.
Let's do that.
And you could raise it up a little bit too.
Okay, this is on. There we go. Great.
I think it's looking good. Hey, and you're looking great. You see? All right, 30 seconds. The countdown is currently running 30 seconds. And because I cannot hear anything,
we're going to have to see if we hear ourselves, right?
Oh, I think once I go ahead and I just start ad-libbing, I'm going to start ad-libbing. I'm going to start ad-libbing. I'm going to start ad-libbing. No, we have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If it's Tuesday, it must be Radio Tipping Points. My name is Mike Boyle, and today we have another special guest, Okan McAllister. Sorry, screwed up your name. Apologies for that, McAllister. And unfortunately, we will not be able to take any calls from the studio audience, so we will have to rely upon the chat box. And I see that we have a few messages already there. Mm-hmm. Rely upon the chat box to make sure that this program is as interactive as possible. So first of all, Okan, thank you very much for joining. Thanks and perhaps to get things going, if you can describe to our audience who you are and roughly what you're concentrating on the subject of system thinking. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got involved with the subject matter.
So, okay, how far do we go back?
You have 57 minutes.
Okay, good. I'm Okan. I'm a social entrepreneur. I used to be, a regular entrepreneur. I kind of was always interested in entrepreneurship, but I was also interested in more the impact side of things as well. And long story short, basically, I never really kind of considered that you could have both. And from the moment that I kind of found out about social entrepreneurship and social business and what this actually means and that it is actually a thing, I basically just dropped everything very soon and started focusing on social entrepreneurship with a large focus also on youth empowerment and youth engagement. So I was in a lot of youth organizations and decided at the end that I would create my own. And within this journey, of course, you also learn a lot about impact, a lot about change, a lot about how that comes about. And one of the areas that was very interesting to me was systems thinking. So we always talk about systems change. Everybody's heard of systems change before. Everybody wants to change systems, but not as many people has heard of systems science, for example, or systems thinking, which is nothing new, but the application to the complex challenges that we face, in my opinion, is not really very, it's not very popular. It's not very widely used so far.
We had a few weeks ago a gentleman by the name of Alexandre Lemille, who is specialized in the human element tied to circularity. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned the word ecosystem quite often. And I wonder if maybe we are talking about the same thing?
To a certain extent. So systems thinking is about understanding the interrelations of elements within a system. So it will look at, what's the relationship between the elements in the system. It will look at how systems change over time. It'll look at how systems change comparison to other systems. So this is what, in essence, what systems thinking is about. And ecosystems, of course, we talk about a lot these days, also with climate change and everything else that's going on. That is a part of, that is also a system.
Okay. Now, in my mind, one of the issues that we have tied to the inability to understand or find the value in system thinking is a question of conditioning. We have been trained to think transactional. That means it's always input, response. And in those things that we cannot directly see, or those elements that the trickle down effect or the knock-on effect, or however we want to call it, it's very difficult for us as human beings to be able to think of those things that are not in front of us, but what the actual effect would be if indeed we perform certain actions. So I don't know what your take is on that, if you think that it's a question of conditioning or not, but the question I would have, and this is a long way of approaching the question, apologies, how do we overcome that as individuals? Because that's really the key if we're talking about impact, right?
I think if I understand you correctly, what they would refer to something like this in systems thinking is the concept of delays, which is very easy to understand. Even if we were to gain clarity on a certain system, and we kind of like, let's say we know what to do, which is like, very rare. The concept of delays kind of sometimes would derail us from what we're trying to achieve. A very simple example, systems thinking can seem really like abstract. So I will try my best to give a lot of analogies and metaphors. So if you have any questions about something, please.
We are already getting feedback in the chat box. I can't read it, but I know there's
they're not questions yet, but yes.
Okay, great.
So please drop a message on, I think we're on YouTube and LinkedIn, right?
We are also on Twitch.
There we go. So a very simple way to understand delays is imagine you go in a shower at the gym. It's a shower that you're not really familiar with, right? As much as your own shower, and you turn on the water, and the water is immediately very cold. And you wait about 3 seconds or so to see if it's going to kind of normalize and be warmer, because you understand that there's a delay between your action of opening the tap and the water's temperature. And then you realize it's not getting that much warmer, so you turn the warmth of it on, and you make it warmer, and then you realize it's way too hot. And then you go back and forth until you kind of stabilize. And this in itself is kind of like a system. So you have these elements, you have you as the actor, and what you don't understand there is you wait 3 seconds for the water to see if the water is going to be warmer, but the delay actually is maybe 10 seconds, right? So you're taking an action, not understanding the delay of kind of the outcome. So this is also the case with a lot of the social and environmental issues that we have. This is, I think, for a long time now been discussed in policy. You create a policy or pass a law, something like this, and to see the actual impact of what this does, it takes a very long time.
I think you described the last 4 months very, very well, because we don't know. We've tried some measurements. We tried to figure out, so did this do any good or not? And then depending upon the response that we receive, we make those necessary adjustments. And unfortunately, I really like your example, because I think that we're very quick in switching the temperature here when I'm referring to the lockdown. So instead of actually going ahead and ensuring that the response that we received was true, because in fact we could have false responses as well. Mm-hmm. You could, going back to your analogy with the water, you could think that the water is getting warmer, but then you realize that actually it's not. It's less stable than you initially thought, because you were working with some sort of social cognition. You think, well, if I turn it warmer, it will take 3 seconds. Well, that is something you convince yourself it will take 3 seconds, and you don't realize that very possibly it can get warmer, and then it can get much colder, and then it can get scalding hot. And so, in essence, we're working with a lot of assumptions based on your example, right?
Yeah. When it comes to what's happening kind of with this virus, systems thinking actually is very, they have very kind of classic models on explaining how they spread. And they've actually done some good work in, I think it's Complexity Science Hub that did this, or at least it was maybe led by them, I'm not sure now, on kind of like predicting and also like kind of explaining more accurately how the virus kind of spreads in Austria, and how does it kind of work. So virus spreading, these sort of things is also something you can really use systems thinking for as well.
Oh, for sure. And I think that is the only way you can truly measure how your efforts are actually gaining hold, by using some sort of system thinking, and I think the example of the delay is very good here. I still like to go back to this concept of what I call conditioning and the individual. Sorry, backtrack. You mentioned that systems thinking is an idea that really hasn't taken hold, if I got you right.
I think some people would disagree with that statement, but
I
I think
meant
systems thinking,
interpretation.
I think systems thinking can be used. Systems thinking will mean different things to different disciplines, right? They also use systems thinking in business as well, because that's also a system, right? And this was more popular, I think, in the, if I'm not mistaken, 90s or so in management. This was kind of like a trend. When it comes to something like climate change, of course, people are using it. There are a lot of organizations, but the general kind of approach doesn't seem to be based on systems thinking. And if you want to zoom out, of course, everybody has a theory of change, and systems thinking is, one of these potential approaches as well. So, but I don't see a lot of examples of this being used, or I actually do see a lot, but maybe it's my bias to say I don't see enough of it.
I actually sympathize very much in this concept, and would argue that we are using it much more. We might not necessarily be calling it system thinking. A case in point, I believe that there's a lot of system thinking to be found within data analytics. And we're talking about sediment analysis, which is a component of data analytics, that there are clearly elements of system thinking, because the real question we always have is between the causality and forgetting my words, this is terrible. The causality and
causation.
Sorry?
Causation.
Causation, yes, causation, because we think that something has taken place. For example, today is Tuesday and it rains. The next Tuesday is going to rain, and we think it's Tuesday is going to rain. Of course, it's a fallacy, because we built a connection that was not there. It was just I'm losing it here. It's terrible. I need to let you take over.
I think I know what you mean. So the correlation and causation is also actually.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Very we were talking about, kind of with impact measurement as well, in my opinion, because what systems thinking was a response for is this reductionist approach in trying to solve problems. So this is still the way we do research, for example, and it's very advantageous for many things. You break down a concept and you create silos within that concept, you put boundaries, and you just really research and really try to understand that concept. And then the more concepts you understand, the more you try to understand the main concept. So this is kind of like the reductionist approach. In this approach, you can have theories that are very Newtonian, very cause and effect. If I make this move, and it's going to have this impact. And this is something that you could think maybe that you can predict. In reality, when issues are complex, like climate change and stuff like this, we are seeing more and more that this is not really the case, because it's about the interaction, the interrelations between the elements, not necessarily for each element separately. And this is where systems thinking comes into play. And going back to what I talked to you about impact measurement is, well, you don't have this cause and effect necessarily. You don't have this Newtonian model of kind of measuring impact. So it makes impact measurement, this correlation, causation, and everything else we talked about, it makes impact measurement also there are some ways, but it makes it also quite difficult to say, I have done this, and therefore it has caused this.
I think we're talking about probability primarily.
Yeah, we can say I have done this, and then full stop. But at some level, it becomes very difficult to kind of prove like what you have done and what it has caused, and that's in the nature of complex systems.
This show, Radio Tipping Point, is about three components, primarily starting with empowerment, inclusiveness, and social transformation. Now, when we started the conversation about you coming on the show, there was a very key element that it was for me, extremely attractive in taking this concept of system change and system thinking, relating it to the individual, and of course, all of these elements that you're basically what comprises you, and certainly all those things that you're doing tied to social. So perhaps if you can explain to me and to everybody else out there, what is this connection for you?
Between social transformation and systems thinking?
Right.
I seem to think, in my approach, I guess, I seem to think that systems thinking is a wise method under which we can approach complex problems.
I hope I'm not going to disappoint you, because I agree with everything you said. I'm hoping that maybe I see that there was a little bit of action going on in the chat box.
Yeah.
But perhaps we need to animate those people watching the show. Just for those of you who just turned in, make sure I don't go ahead and butcher your name again. Okan McAllister, who is a specialist tied to, and I hope, I knew that look was coming. Specialist tied to system thinking is one of his passions, so to speak. And the subject that we are talking about is one, making sure that we understand exactly what the system thinking is all about and how that actually plays a role with regards to the subject of transformation. So now I'm coming to the how question, Okan.
Of course, it's a very big question. I think a systems thinker would, one of the first things this person would say is that they don't have the answers. So
That's called honesty. And
so I'm sort of disappointed. But yes, that's also true that not many people do, like nobody really has the answers. So look, I'll give you an example about how this works. That there's a story, like a parable, that they usually
we like
use to kind of explain what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this, if you heard of it before, I think it's from Sufi culture. 3 blind men encounter an elephant in the forest, and one of them touches the tail, thinks it's a rope. One of them touches the ear, thinks it's a carpet. One of them touches the leg, thinks it's a column. And in their world, in that context, you believing that that's a rope doesn't really change that much for you, because you can still achieve the same things with a tail that you could with a rope. So it's not really, you're not really that far off. And you're kind of right in your own way. But the problem with complex issues is when you think that it's a rope, then you try to come up with solutions for a rope. And those solutions don't work with an elephant. So for you to have this approach of systems thinking, seeing the whole, as we call it, you need to be able to see the elephant. So this is the difference between this reductionist approach and seeing kind of silos versus seeing the whole and seeing interconnectedness. And this is I think might be a good place to start for us. And this is one of the reasons why we also have the conference, to kind of just bring people together so they can kind of start to see the whole picture. Because when it gets to taking action, you need to really consider the interconnectedness of everything. So when we look at gender equality, when you think about gender equality, you might have certain questions or certain answers you might want to give. When you talk about gender equality and artificial intelligence, then you start asking different questions. When you talk about textile production and gender equality, you start asking different questions. So system science overall and complexity overall also tries to make sense of this interconnectedness. As you can now, maybe your mind is going as to how many other interconnections there are in social and environmental problems, and how it's so huge. How can you make sense of any of this? And this is what system science also tries to kind of make sense of. And I think that's a kind of a good place to start.
I think there's another element while you were explaining the actual approach, and I really like the story. It reminded me of an issue that we have, especially tied to innovation, my personal take, and the issue is called functional fixation. And that means that we have a glass, and we think that the purpose of this glass is just to put some sort of liquid into it and to consume the liquid. Whereas you are able to do all kinds of things with this glass if you were able to free yourself of this idea that it's only here for drinking. Does that have anything to do with what you were talking about?
I'm sure it's a part of it. I'm sure that exists as well. But I wouldn't focus on what the glass can do. I would more focus on why the glass exists and how does it function within its world, how it's being used. So that will be kind of like trying to see the whole, the kind of like the whole.
We're in agreement. The issue here is that we think that this glass could only be it can only be used for a certain purpose.
Mhm.
And so once you've freed yourself of this concept, which actually gets back to what you were saying, you're freeing yourself of the association, which means that you don't find the necessity to have any type of association, getting back to your point. Then you realize the full potential of what can actually be done with the glass through time, through various activities that are not necessarily directed as cause and effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see your point.
And I'm hoping we're not getting too esoteric for all of you out there. I see that the chat box has been rather dormant. And so let me take advantage of a couple different things. First of all, for those of you who are listening to this purely audio and wondering what's going on here, first of all, you are at Radio Tipping Point, and my name is Mike Boyle, and I have Okan McAllister here in the studio, and we're talking about system change, system thinking, and social transformation. Would you consider that to be a correct assessment here, Okan?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. And we are also live streaming on LinkedIn Live, YouTube, and Twitch. And so unfortunately, we have some technical issues today and are not able to go ahead and take any telephone calls. So I apologize for that. That being said, we have the opportunity for anybody who's watching this live stream to go ahead and ask us questions. And I would definitely welcome the opportunity, Okan, for somebody to come up with a question that we can't answer, because I believe that we can answer all questions. And so that was a very strong statement, or a challenge, so to speak, to all of you who are currently watching this live stream to catch us off guard, because we are live and there is no turning back. If indeed you challenge us in a way that we cannot go ahead and respond, then that's clearly a gotcha moment.
That's right. I mean, I think systems change systems. These are topics that everybody talks about, and some people are maybe a little more cynical about it. Some people, maybe it makes more sense. But yeah, feel free to ask questions if you're curious about something, if you need clarification on concepts. Yeah, that's what we're here for.
I can see I'm the much more ostentation person in the room. I think one of the issues for individuals, I keep coming back to the human being, because in my mind, we are the center. Maybe not the center, but we are a key component of the ecosystem. I'm following Alexandra's. He corrected me, said humans are not in the center, because we've been doing that thank you, Okan, for agreeing to that, because we have this idea that we are always the focus of everything. And of course, I come originally from a society where we think that we can manage nature and don't realize that we are actually part of nature, and that's all part of this ecosystem. But getting back to the interrelationship, looking at it from a human condition, if that's a correct way of describing it, and understanding that we have problems that are seen to be wicked problem being something that we have no clue where to start. And I tend to think that system thinking or system change plays a very important role in how you go ahead and approach such wicked problems.
Yeah, so these wicked problems or complex problems are, one of the main things we talk about when we talk about systems thinking. It's this idea of what I mentioned earlier about this Newtonian way of trying to understand and respond to problems. And complex problems would say, look, you don't really know what the recipe is completely. And you also don't really know what the end effect of what you do is actually going to be. So there are different frameworks in systems thinking on how. So the question then is like, what do we do? Of course, and there are many frameworks, but one of the frameworks that's more popular is called the Kinevin framework. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's Welsh. So I think it's Canadian, yeah.
You're asking
it's like
the wrong person. I
CY
botched your
Okay, if
name
you
in
want
the
to
beginning, so.
if you want to Google it, it's CYNEFIN. And you have, there it tries to explain kind of what to do in situations where you encounter complex problems. In other words, what to do in situations where you don't really know the end effect of what you're going to do and kind of where to enter and everything. And one of the things that it suggests is that you need to probe the system. So, and I'm actually writing an article about something very inspired by this framework, which is the idea of a bipartisan public body of some sort that focuses only on failing in social and environmental innovation. Because some small examples of this exist already. They've also tried this in Scandinavian countries with education. So, wouldn't it be nice if we had some sort of a bipartisan body that was a default, kind of like our waste management entity where, it doesn't matter which party is coming and going, that's just the default, that it always will exist. The direction maybe is different and the budget maybe is different. I actually don't know if the budget changes that much. But it's like a default. And this could be like an entity where it's accepted that wins and fails are just that, wins and fails. They're not a part of any sort of party political agenda. And it's accepted that we fail. And we just go ahead and run hundreds and hundreds of experiments on different social and environmental issues that we encounter. And this would be kind of like this quote unquote systems thinking approach, for example, and trying to find, because we focus a lot on trying to be right, trying to be correct about our approach, right? This is the right approach. This is right because of this and this and this. Is that too abstract? Should I give another example?
No. In fact, you've triggered a few more questions from my side, and I hope that maybe those people listening, watching the live stream, would find some inspiration of asking some questions as well. But the one that immediately came to mind, there were two, but let me start with the one. When we don't know what the result's going to be, or we think that we achieved that of what we were looking for, very often we have an effect that we did not expect. And let me give you a couple of examples, because I think this is extremely important. One of them was tied to the Industrial Revolution and taking it even one step further, an invention of the car and this, that, and the other thing. And through that, we did not realize the damage we were actually creating by letting off all the CO2. And in fact, this is something that we've known for longer than I've been on this planet, and that's been a very long time, folks. The Keeling effect, or the Keeling curve, better said. It's all about beware of the unintended, and we call it what's called a progress trap. And so we think that we're moving in the right direction, and then all of a sudden we run across something that we did not expect. And all of a sudden said, how can that happen? And so the question I would have, is there any type within the concept of system thinking, is there something like a fallback and recovery? I'm looking at it very often from an IT perspective. If something didn't work out, in IT it's very easy because you just go ahead and you move back to the previous state. Obviously not so easy when we're talking about the physical world. That being said, is there a concept within system thinking that deals with that subject in some fashion?
I think what systems thinking would argue is we are kind of wired to assume there's a point A and point B. We want to set goals and we want to do this, and then we want to reach a certain point. But one metaphor that I've heard about systems thinking also is it's like working on an airplane that is flying. So you don't really, and the airplane never lands. So there will always be something. We have this like fixation of trying to fix a system, or there's this we say broken systems are broken, which is not true at all, and I can elaborate on that a little bit later.
I'd like you to. That'd be good.
we have this thing like I'm going to intervene and I'm going to change something in it, and now it's going to be better. And more accurate way of thinking about it would be I'm going to intervene in the system, not knowing what it's going to achieve, and then I'm going to try to create the optimal outcome for most people. That's kind of like at some level what the impact world is trying to do. So just like startups, if anybody's from the startup world listening and bored, from the startup world, you also have this concept of the lean startup method, where you try something and then see how it works, and you take that feedback and then build again. And in terms of systems thinking, there's also something similar where you are supposed to at least check what your intervention has kind of caused, what it kind of created over time. But the current structures that we have in terms of, let's say, funding or something like this, doesn't really allow for you to do this, because you have, let's say, funding, which is great. We're pretty lucky in Austria, and also I think European Union also, relatively. And you have a project start, a project end, and you deliver your impact and you deliver your project, and you have work packages and stuff like this. And there's no incentive for you to go back afterwards and check if this has really, made the effect that you were hoping to achieve.
Or conversely, the one that you didn't want to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, there's this popular example I give when I do systems thinking workshops is the island of, there was this case in the island of Kiribati where they were trying to, there are two main livelihoods. One is like coconut farming, one is fishing. And they were trying to make sure that people are fishing a little bit less because there was depletion in the fish stocks. So they go ahead and, very classic response, they go ahead and subsidize coconut farming. So to just get people to focus on coconut farming more. But again, they didn't look at the whole, and what ended up happening is you had more coconut farmers, which is what we're talking about. You have achieved what you wanted to achieve, your outcome. But then what happened there is they spent less time coconut farming. Fishing takes more time. And they made money, and they made more money. And what did they do with that money that they earned? They bought better fishing equipment, and they went fishing in their free time. So these are the elements of the system that the policymakers kind of ignored, because they ignored the fact that fishing wasn't just a job for the people. It was also a leisure activity. It's something they like to do in their free time. So what happened is they had more free time, they had more money, and they just bought better fishing equipment, and they were fishing more efficiently, and the fish stocks actually ended up depleting more. So this is a classic example of what we are talking about.
Extremely interesting. And my first reaction when I hear a story like that is that, to what degree did the individuals who started that initiative take the time to deal with the locals, and perhaps even bring the locals into the process of coming up with a model, making the decision, and ensuring that they were part of the validation process? And I'm thinking out loud, and of course that's easier said than done, but I'd be curious on your opinion on that.
This is what also we refer to as co-creation. So this is exactly how you should kind of approach. If you're trying to see the whole elephant, regardless of how expertised you are in ropes or tails, it's going to be very difficult for you to understand the interconnectedness between the tail and the rest of the elephant's body, if I continue with my metaphor. Well, the only way to combat this kind of is to have a co-creation process. So bring in people that are experts, and we do have them, and try to see the whole elephant, and try to see the interconnections of everything that you're trying to do and the problem that you're trying to solve. And this is one of the, I don't want to say the easiest thing, because I think some people would argue it's very difficult depending on which issue you're tackling. But this is just a mindset. And for some people, systems thinking is a mindset. For some people, it's a tool. It's a philosophy. This is a certain mindset that we need to embody, whether you're listening to this working for a company or an NGO, or you're a change maker, in general terms, that you want to, you're in this impact world. Co-creation is one of the first things, right? We want to, in social entrepreneurship, I'm jumping from topic to topic a little bit, but
You're not.
for
Actually,
social
just continue on.
entrepreneurship, there's this thing where you have this entrepreneur, and you have this as kind of like the hero, this person that founds things and affects change and all this stuff. And this is also like this is inaccurate, right? So change doesn't happen with like change happens when people take charge. That's also one, but from a systems perspective, you don't impose change. How system change happen is you help unlock the conditions through which a system changes. So this is a big distinction, because this is the difference between, I'm going to start a company and I'm going to change everything, and I'm the kind of like the protagonist, and like I'm going to affect change. And the other one is, we're all kind of like a speck of dust. You can be the most successful social entrepreneur in the world, or the most funded and most well-known NGO in the world. You cannot do without everybody else in this ecosystem, in this impact. So at a meta level, I get asked sometimes, veganism or zero waste and stuff like this. Yes, they're all impactful to some degree, right? We should all understand that we play a part, and we play a big part, small part. That part for me is not that important. And we're all kind of like these specks of dust, and you cannot achieve anything just by yourself, regardless of how funded, how well known, who's backing you, all this stuff. And this is a characteristic of a complex problem. There's no one size fits all answer, and there's no one organization in the world that can fix it. If that's the case, then it probably wasn't a complex problem to begin with. So tying it back to what we're talking about, co-creation in this perspective becomes one of the most underrated, in my opinion, one of the most impactful things you can do.
Wow. You could not realize this, but you described the modus vivendi of this program, because it's all about empowerment. And the whole idea is that one individual, alluding to that of what you mentioned, tied to the hero, the person who comes in, who is supposed to save the day, whereas in essence that is an illusion, and in fact is very dangerous, I would argue. But actually, we're talking about the collective, the power of the many, which allows us to go ahead and accomplish those things that we can never accomplish otherwise. The problem, I think, the dichotomy lies in the fact that, getting back to this concept of a wicked problem, we as individuals keep saying, this is so big, I cannot solve it. But getting back to what you were saying, and that was so beautiful what you just said, Okan, that we all have a small part to play in all of it, and it's the collective. It's the collective of all of our actions that allow us to go ahead and achieve those things. And maybe I'm reading too much into what you were saying. You can correct me, and I know you will if I finally finish talking here. But all kidding aside, but it's the collective that allows us to go ahead and accomplish those things. I do have going back maybe about 5 minutes, when you were talking about this idea of expertise, I struggle with this word, because in my mind, there is a certain expertise that everybody can bring to the equation. Of course, we can measure the magnitude. There was a saying that I read recently from Bill Nye, the science guy, who said that everybody can tell you something you didn't know already. And I think that falls directly in line with what you were talking about. And it's the whole idea, and that for me, that would be the basis of co-creation. Knowing full well that somebody else is going to tell me something I didn't think of before. Is that added value? For me, it is. And I think that is necessary for us to go ahead and accomplish those things that we as individuals can never accomplish. So let's kill the hero.
Yeah, definitely. Agreed. I mean, yeah, co-creation, without co-creation, it's, I mean, doesn't make any sense.
No, it certainly doesn't. There was last week I had a show on empowerment, and the subject was empowerment and now what? And so what I did was I looked at it from a couple different perspectives. One being from the corporate, where the boss says you are now empowered, where in essence it doesn't mean anything because we empower ourselves. So empowerment is not something that's bestowed upon us, but rather something that we develop as individuals, number one. Number two, the problems or the stumbling blocks that we have to reach that empowerment are huge. And you alluded to this tied to the startups, but I think in multiple respects. And in the subject that I called fear of failure, and I know you're familiar with this one. So then the real question is, how do we go ahead and create an environment? I think this is really the question. How do we create an environment so that co-creation can flourish? And we're talking about a societal question. And you have 16 minutes, go.
Yeah, big question.
Yeah, it is a big question.
Okay, I mean, there are many perspectives you can take on this, but for example, something like social entrepreneurship wasn't meant to be built on competition. We have my background is in business and finance, and in this world, you would have, if you were to build a company and you have a bunch of industry secrets, this is your USP, this is your unique, competitive advantage, right? And in terms of social business, you are playing in a field where competition exists. So this is kind of like game theory. So you have two options. You either compete, or there's going to be things are probably going to be harder for you. And this is also the same with civil society to a certain extent. And this again comes back to the topic of who pays for social value, who pays for environmental value, right? I don't want to go too far off the topic, but in the case of economics and everything, so we decided a long time ago that there's going to be this quote unquote free market. And we're going to kind of just like try to regulate and nudge it in ways that is optimal. And that's like decentralized, so everything doesn't come from the government. Innovation and everything like that doesn't come from centralized location. And when it comes to social and environmental value or social innovation, there are a lot of verticals, whether it's education or something else, where this sort of problem is still trying to be solved by centralized entities. So, and the same kind of liberation doesn't exist as much when it comes to social and environmental innovation. So it's still, okay, this is the role of the state to, pass this law and that law and do this and that. And these are, of course, things you do to create certain or try to unlock certain outcomes that you're trying to achieve. But still, it's more centralized. And also because the issue of funding and competition, of course, also, which is what I was talking about, who pays for social innovation. So if the state is paying for social innovation, then that works differently. If the people are paying for social innovation, it works differently. So when you create an economic value for somebody, that is very understandable to people. You save me money, I'm going to do this. But when it comes to, for myriad of reasons that we probably don't have time for, when it comes to social and environmental education, if I say I'm saving this or I'm doing this and doing that, that doesn't hold economic value. And we all make our bigger decisions based on economic calculations, right? So we decide if a move is correct or incorrect a lot of times by trying to justify it economically. So basically, when it comes to this topic, for me, it always comes back to how is the civil society, how are they included in the change process? How are they empowered in the change process? Why do we only take economic value into consideration when making decisions? And what can we do? So this is kind of, I feel, is what's kind of underneath what we were talking about, what your question was.
Yeah, I think that there's an additional component that comes into play, and that would be tied to the viability of the models that we're using. And I allude directly to that, what you were talking about, the economic model. I think there's another component that we always seem to neglect, and I alluded to it earlier. I'm going to call this the total cost of ownership. And so within this model that we have, or this construct, we sell things that actually belong to all of us. Let's stay with water, because I don't want to go towards oil. The oil is a little bit too complicated, or maybe too hot a topic. Not that water isn't, but we feel that we can go ahead and sell water rights. And this is one of the biggest problems we have globally that we never talk about. If we look at the Middle East, if there's going to be a big brouhaha coming out of anywhere on a subject, it's going to be tied to the lack of water in the Middle East. But the fact is that we believe that we can go ahead and sell these rights to somebody else. And I come from an area that is truly exploited. I'm originally from California. California is a desert for the most part, and where most of the agrarian elements are taking place, or in an area that really wasn't, some might argue with me on this one, but it's not really suited for it. And so what they decided early on was to bring the water from the north, or from the Colorado River, into this area. And then, of course, because it was not a natural environment, they polluted the ground with fertilizers, which got into the drink, that gets into the groundwater, et cetera, et cetera. But getting back to the point, the whole idea is that we believe that we can go ahead and sell rights to elements that actually belong to all of us. And I think going back to a few of the things that you said earlier about making decisions, it's almost like we're playing God. And I think that this is all part of the economic model. Who has more money, and so they have the rights. Can't we go ahead and figure out a way to come up with a more equitable approach on this one? Because the costs that we have later on that are not part of the transactional costs. I mean, if I buy the water from you and then I feel I can do anything with it, and that is clearly the source of the inequity.
There's a very classic archetype that explains this in systems thinking as well. It's, if you have a lake and you have fishermen and fisherwomen, and you have, it's their livelihood, so you kind of just let them go, and nobody owns the water, and people fish, and then they make money from the fish, and therefore they fish more, and they start relying on the lake and everything else. But everybody looks out for their own incentive. Therefore, nobody addresses the fact that there's not going to be any fish soon in the lake.
Now we're directly in commons area, because these are the elements to be found
within the tragedy of the commons.
Well, not only that, but the whole idea, if we look at Elinor Ostrom in the approach of how we can better manage these things, then the whole structure rises and falls in a governance of how we actually go ahead and going back to your example with the fishing. So we need to come up with some sort of governance model which enables us to go ahead and enforce it, so that people realize that if it does not work, then, if they are abusing the governance structure, then there is a price to pay. And Eleanor talks about a very clear approach, and that you don't go ahead and come up with a hammer right away, that you take a more gradual approach to ensure that the message is understood, and making sure that we did not ostracize somebody for no reason, because things happen, we make mistakes. But I tend to think that all of this, when we're talking about the economic model you're referring to, it really does come down to this point, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's another giant
question.
For
another subject, I know, for another program.
Think that it's some people think it's capitalism, some people think socialism is the answer, or some other economic system. I more think of it from a perspective of, we don't know what the hell we're doing. So this is just, I don't want to get into philosophy of science and stuff now, but at some level, we still haven't found the best way to govern things, best way to build a society, and where it's just like kind of like what we've came up with. So this is also, I think, tied to what I said earlier about systems are not broken. And this is important to understand because what happens a lot of times, and I'm in the impact bubble, whatever you want to call it, what happens a lot of time is you have, you meet your friends and you talk about these issues, and then the conversation gets to a point where somebody says, "Oh, the system is broken. Oh, it's capitalism. Oh, it's something else." Okay, I'm not denying that capitalism has a big impact on what we're going through, but the part that I care about more is what happens after that sentence. So what happens after that sentence usually is you take another sip of your drink and then you move on with your life. And this is where, as somebody who's trying to educate myself on systems thinking, um, that's something that frustrates me because systems are not broken. It's like saying that the cloud is broken because it's raining. So systems create outcomes and output of some sort. And when you say system is broken, it's kind of this blanket answer that there's nothing we can do about it. That's what it implies. It's just broken. It's just me against the system, etc. There's no against the system. You're a part of the system. You're a part of the outcome. Maybe you didn't willingly vote a certain way and whatever to create this outcome, but it doesn't take you away from the system that you're in. And just because the system doesn't create an optimal outcome for you doesn't mean that the system is broken. The biggest, because if you talk about capitalism, capitalism is great for people who have capital, right? So it's when you don't say that, when you don't say that systems are broken, it allows for a certain discourse. Who does the system work for? Why? What are the structures in place that allow for this to go on? What are the mindsets in place that allow this to go on? Right? There's a very simple model for people who are getting into systems thinking called the Iceberg Model. Some people refer to iceberg metaphor more scientifically correctly. You can Google this; it's very easy to understand. That kind of tries to explain to you what is kind of underneath the visible consequence of the thing that you're trying to fight. So if you're trying to, combat homelessness, there's a lot of things underneath that. Homelessness, somebody ending up homeless, is a consequence of a lot of things that happen. And systems thinking would look at the entire kind of depth of what is happening. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what kind of economic system or a political system or whatever system that we should adopt to fix everything.
Don't worry, we don't expect you to be a hero. Don't worry.
But I just find this sort of mindset to be more congruent with the outcome that you would like to achieve.
Did I understand you correctly? I think in that of what you just said, you told us there's no such thing as a wicked problem.
There are definitely wicked problems. It's just the thinking that these wicked problems create systems or are a part of systems, and this is what breaks the system. I think that narrative needs to start to change when we talk about the system doesn't provide the outcome I would like, or the system doesn't provide the optimal outcome for environmental sustainability. I think there's a big difference between these two statements. If we do the latter, if we do the second statement, I think that leaves a lot of room for discourse. And if we keep saying systems are broken, which also from a systems thinking perspective, I know it's just colloquially, but from a systems thinking perspective, also it's not something that really exists to some extent. I think this language is what I'm trying to say is this language needs to start to change so that we can have a discourse about who does the system work for very well, why, what are the mindset that keep the system that way, what are the structures that keep the system that way, and then if you're in this impact bubble, you want to make a difference, then we can have a discourse about how do we kind of approach that problem.
There was something else that I heard in that of what you were saying, and I would phrase it as we don't know what we don't know and we don't like it. And so we're always trying to manage that in some fashion. Whereas from that, what I'm hearing from you, Okan, part of the idea of system thinking is a question of acceptance, that you accept it. And that without the acceptance, you cannot, it's a real struggle to manage the rest. Did I get it right?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of like systems thinking is something that embraces complexity, right? It's all complex, or in more everyday words, it's all messed up. We've said this once. The more you talk about it, the deeper it gets, and you just kind of, our brains are not good enough to actually map out every single interconnection, every single element that exists in a system. So it's just something that embraces complexity. In my personal opinion, it's just a more healthier way of looking at complex systems and not try to, have this top down, like, I'm going to manage this system. I have the full overview somehow, and, it's going to work. And this ties in again with the elephant example of people thinking in silos, and, systems thinking, would argue interconnectedness is more relevant. So this is another thing I would like to mention. I like this example from Dr. Russell Akoff that he gives about building a car. Um, so if you were like to, and the irony is not lost on me that I'm talking about a car. If you were to try to create the best car in the world, and you would bring in the best seats, you bring in seats from, can we say brands here?
Yeah.
From
As long as you do it less than a minute, we don't have a minute.
From a Maybach, or we bring in kind of transmission from a different brand, and et cetera, and we bring the best parts of each car brand and put them in a room. You wouldn't have a working car because those parts wouldn't work together. So what that means for us is, you can be right about degrowth, you can be right about this, you can be right about that, but as long as we don't have a system where all of those elements work together, then this transformation that you're hoping for wouldn't happen. So this is why it's very important to see the whole elephant.
Great last words. Okan McAllister, thank you very much for joining. Thank you all for listening, and we will be back next week talking about no waste. I'll have Lorraine Wenzel from No Waste Austria on the show. Thanks again. Talk to you soon. Bye. Okay.
Das Freie Radio in Wien.
Now we know the show is over. Hey, folks, this is our post system change program, our wrap up. What are your thoughts, Okan? Did you like the way it went?
Yeah, I mean, we went through a lot of stuff.
We went through the dialectic. We really went into some heavy stuff. And I tend to think that's why we didn't get much on the chat box, because we were in a flow. We were clearly in a flow. And because I'm totally obsessed with these ideas, and I tend to think you are too. And so we just went in a certain path.
I hope that we didn't jump from too much. We didn't jump too much.
I don't think we did.
But I'm glad that it's streaming, so you can refer back to it if there's something that you want to rehear, rewatch, and ask questions after the stream as well. You can just reach out to me.
No, we'll make sure they have contact information for you, because I think you mentioned a couple different things during the live stream, during the radio show, better said, that I think it would be good if we can go ahead and provide some links, perhaps, if you have, because I know that you had some clear ideas in your head that you
this is actually a thing that comes up a lot, and whatever that we do, people want to say, okay, where do I start? So we actually built a resource library. It's a curated.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
Curated bunch of curated content from whether you're a beginner or you're like researching about the topic. There's content for all kind of levels, and you can even filter it according to like the length of how much it takes to consume this content, whether it's a video or a podcast or an article. And we have this library on systems thinking, social innovation, social entrepreneurship, and solid waste, gender equality, and responsible digitalization. So along the way, all of our kind of learnings and all the interesting resources that we cover, along with the things that we encounter when we're building the lesson plans for the kids, for example, or doing research for the conference, or also for Kinby, we kind of put all this together because why not? And it's free, you can access it. I think it's library.oneday.at.
Okay. We're still live. So if indeed we have inspired you in some fashion to come up with a question or two, we'll stick around until we feel that we've run. That could take a while, I know. but I'm thinking about what you just mentioned, and it's almost like we're talking about system thinking for beginners. So I'm wondering, do you have like coloring books and stuff like that too? It could be quite useful, I would say. I can relate to that sort of thing, Okan. If you're looking for some impetus here, then please come up with a coloring book for me, okay?
Yeah,
thank you.
We just had a meeting with somebody that suggested that we should also take systems thinking into classrooms.
For sure.
And let's hope that works. And the thing that I saw that was fun was, but I don't know where it is now, but I think you can Google it. They have cartoons to explain systems thinking. That was fun. But if you're more like, there's a book that I think is like where you should start, and by Dana Meadows. It's called Thinking in Systems, a primer, and that's a pretty good place to start, I would say.
Okay.
Even before that, if you would like to kind of just get a more quicker overview, then just check out the content library, and there are like videos there, 5-minute videos and whatever, to explain kind of the concept a little bit, and then the more interested you are, the more you can kind of dig.
Mm-hmm. The more you dig, the deeper the hole gets.
Yeah,
and I think it's a good metaphor for the subject.
It's also interesting, right? It also gets interesting.
Yeah, no, it does, and I enjoy the subject, as you can. I'm sure you picked up on.
Yeah.
So, Okan, thank you very much for joining today.
I
think that session was it was mega. I really enjoyed it a lot. Hope that all of you got some added value out of it. And I think Okan's suggestion, because it was pretty deep, some of this stuff, please feel free to view it a number of times. There is no additional charges. There's no charge at all. And furthermore, if indeed later on you have any questions about anything that we mentioned, don't hesitate to go ahead and reach out to Okan or to myself, and welcome the opportunity to go ahead and continue this conversation in this fashion, because I think it's very valuable. And the more we have an educated populace understanding these questions and understanding that they are able to go ahead and master it if they give themselves a chance. Back to empowerment, folks. The better off we are societally. I'm firmly convinced.
Yeah, that's one of the many reasons why Mission Liftoff exists.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay.
I agree with you.
Yeah. So how boring. We got along too well. We have to come up with this. Okay, the next time we have to come up with a subject that we're much more contentious. I thought you were almost getting there with the bipartisan. I thought, well, no, actually, that's the only way it's going to work. So we came close. In any case, thanks again. I think with no more questions, we'll go ahead and pull the plug. Thanks again for joining, and we'll definitely be back next week with Lorraine Wenzel from No Waste Austria. And of course, we will have other elements that we'll be talking about. So thanks for joining, and see you soon. Okay.